finishing the series today. We started this series on Jonah 4 weeks ago, and so we're winding down today. If you're like, when will this stop? Very soon, I promise you. Next week, Ashley will be back preaching, and it'll all feel better. So I promise it's gonna it will be much better much sooner than maybe you were afraid of. So today we are finishing the Jonah series. But before we get into too deep into that, I want to talk about my favorite job that I ever had, and it wasn't at. It wasn't at I've worked at 4 different churches, not including the Well, because again, I do not work here. But I've worked at 4 other churches, and if you were to ask me, like, what was your favorite job, it would not be any of those churches. Not that I didn't enjoy, to one degree or another, all of those different churches. But my favorite job I ever had was summer of 1998. I'm 17 years old, and I worked at Blockbuster Video, and not to brag. And so. Now, for those of you under the age of 30, gather around, children. I have a tale to tell. There was this place, and for those of you, some of you, like, you see this photo and you can smell like the way it smelled inside Blockbuster Video. And so there were these places you could go, and it was like a treat on a Friday night after school. Like, oh, the school week is done. We have nothing else to do. Come gather, children, and let's get in the station wagon and let's go to Blockbuster Video, and everybody gets to choose one movie for the weekend. And it was the greatest thing in the world. And so I got to work. When I was 17, I worked at Blockbuster Video for 1 summer. It was the best summer ever. And everything about that job was exactly what I had hoped it would be, except for one thing. There was this guy who was one of my coworkers. And I would say there were probably about a dozen or so of us who all worked there, like, for a little bit, either full-time or part-time, based on, various shifts or whatever. And everybody was great to work with, except for this one guy. And for the purposes of the story, I'm going to call this guy Alex, which also happened to have been his name. But that's what I'll call him. And so Alex is what you would call a difficult person. And so no matter what was going on, no matter how well everybody else was doing during their day, Alex was there to sort of ruin your day. He was very rude. He was very condescending. And none of the coworkers liked him. Most customers did not like him. And somehow, I don't know who he had blackmail on that he never got fired from this job, but he got away with everything until one day. And so there was this, so we got secret shopped one day. And again, for those under 30, okay, so if you work in retail, there is a thing called secret shoppers. And sometimes if a secret shopper might come in and pretend to be a normal customer, but what they're doing is they're checking on basically your level of customer service and knowledge of whatever it is that you're doing. And so we got secret shopped, and Alex got the secret shopper. And we failed that secret shop. And so there was one night, a couple of weeks after the person had been in our store, we all got called into a midnight meeting because the store doesn't close until midnight. And so everybody has to stay until after closing. So if you worked a morning shift, you have to come back for the midnight meeting because everybody has to be like reprimanded for how badly we did on this secret shopper thing. And it's like somebody from the corporate office came in and he was very upset. And we were all sitting there thinking like, oh no, I can't believe we've all let down Blockbuster Video. They're going to be around forever. And we can't, we really don't want them to have bad feelings about any of us. And so we're all in this meeting and everyone knows, oh, this is like Alex is the one who got in trouble. And he's the one who completely blew the secret shopper because he was very, very rude. And so everyone is sitting in this meeting and his name gets brought up, and they try really hard to not bring up his name, and eventually it becomes like very obvious of who we're talking about. And so the corporate guy, he looks directly at him, and we start learning all sorts of things about how many rude things he said to this one particular secret shopper. And the corporate guy's face keeps getting redder and redder, and Alex keeps getting like smaller and smaller as he talks. And we learned that he was going to get he didn't get fired, but he got moved to a different store, and he was put on probation. And so I remember sitting there, first of all, thinking I am so sorry that this all went the way it did, but also I'm really glad that this happens to Alex. Look, I don't like who I am in this story. Okay, look, I'm not proud that I was sitting there kind of gleefully enjoying the fact that Alex was finally getting what was coming to him. But I was, because there is this part of me that really enjoys seeing people get what I believe that they deserve. And so there is some kind of satisfaction from seeing someone that you don't like get what you think they should have coming to them. And so that's exactly what happened. And by the way, the day that he got transferred to another store, the rest of the summer was like rainbows and sunshine. Everything about that job was great. I wish there still were Blockbuster Videos around so that I could just go work there, and I would really just enjoy it, I think. But there is this thing, and maybe this has never happened to you because you're a better person than me, which I'm totally willing to accept. But for those of us who have had somebody in their lives who you thought, when is something going to happen to sort of like reset the scale and make this the way it should be? And when will they finally get the thing that they so clearly deserve? And in fact, there's a German word for this, and you probably know this word. It's the word Schadenfreude, and it is. This word literally means to gain pleasure derived by someone from, pleasure derived by someone from another person's misfortune. So like the more a person I don't like suffers or has some sort of an embarrassment kind of situation happen to them, there's a part of you that kind of enjoys that. That's called Schadenfreude, for those of you who are still learning German. And but there is something inside of, like, this is so common, there's a word for it. You know what I'm saying? And so there is something inside of us that loves to see bad things happen to people when we believe they've had it coming for a while. And so what we're talking about, all this to say, I just wanted to get that off my chest. It has nothing to do with anything. I'm joking. So this is actually directly related to what the book of Jonah is actually about. So the book of Jonah, which we've been talking about now for 4 weeks, we often, if you grew up in churches and you've heard the story a lot of times, again, and I've addressed this every week, we tend to sort of lock into this idea of guy gets swallowed by fish, and that becomes how the whole story, that becomes sort of the central image and theme of the whole story. And we often talk about this story and we make it about the fish, and we assume that the whole story is about just basically doing whatever God has told you to do. So it becomes a cautionary tale about disobedience. That's how it often gets framed in like children's stories or whatever. But that's not actually what the book is about. Like that is an event that occurs early on in the book, but the book goes on. Like if the whole book was about the fish, then the book would be over in 2 chapters. But the book goes on, and you learn that, the fish was actually not the central point of the story at all. And this was never meant to be a story about just doing what you're told. Ultimately, the book of Jonah is about how we view people that we don't like, and the dark places that can take us. It's about feeling that little sense of joy when someone that we think deserves it gets what's coming to them. The book of Jonah is about exactly the thing I was thinking in that midnight meeting at Blockbuster Video a very long time ago. And so, but the book is an indictment of all the things of things like dehumanizing other people, or hatred of the other, and Schadenfreude. And so just to recap, just to get us back up to where we are in the story, and like I said, we're landing the whole thing today. So we're going to recap the whole story just really quickly. So the recap here is God comes to Jonah and says, I want you to go to Nineveh and tell them and warn them basically that if they don't change their ways, they're going to be destroyed. Jonah does not want to do that. We talked last week about why that was. And so Jonah goes the other direction. He boards the boat. He gets thrown off the boat. The fish ejects him. And so last week we talked about how Jonah then very, very subtly goes through the whole city of Nineveh and as quietly as he possibly can just warns people like, hey, by the way, if you don't do something about it, the whole city will be destroyed. And so that is where we are in the story so far. So again, going back to what we talked about last week, why does Jonah not want to go to Nineveh? Well, it's because it's the capital of the Assyrian Empire, who have been oppressing and inflicting pain on the people of northern Israel, which is where Jonah is from. So Jonah does not run away at the beginning of the story because he's afraid. And that tends to be a thing that we assume, Jonah's very afraid. He's afraid that if he goes to Nineveh, something bad's going to happen to him. I would argue that's never Jonah's problem. Jonah is running away because he doesn't want anyone to save Nineveh. Jonah is running away because he's worried it might work. And so after the fish episode, Jonah goes to Nineveh. He gives people this warning that God has asked him to give, and it totally works. And everyone repents of their ways and vows to do better, which we talked about last week. And so then we're going to jump in where we left off last week, which is Jonah chapter 3, verse 10. It says, when God saw what they did, what the people of Nineveh did, and how they turned from their evil ways, God relented and did not bring on them the destruction he had threatened. So everything goes great. Like this, it goes exactly the way you might, if you don't know any of the people involved, it goes exactly the way you might think that's what we're hoping for, right? Like this is a good outcome. So if the story ended here, we would say, what a triumphant tale that we've just been told. What a wonderful ending to this story. If the movie ended here, this would be a great place to roll the credits. But it doesn't end here. It keeps on going. And so we get a whole fourth chapter that has nothing to do with this. And so in Jonah chapter 4, beginning in verse 1, it says this. It says, but to Jonah, so we've just learned at the end of verse 3, everything went well. The people have changed their ways. Everybody is safe. And then in Jonah 4, verse 1, it says, but to Jonah, this seemed very wrong, and he became angry. He prayed to the Lord, isn't this what I said, Lord, when I was still at home? This is what I tried to forestall by fleeing to Tarshish. I knew that you are a gracious and compassionate God, slow to anger and abounding in love, a God who relents from sending calamity. He's talking about it like it's a bad thing. You notice that? Like he said, this is what I was trying to avoid. I know how merciful and loving you are, and I was just really annoyed by that. And so I decided to go the other way. Jonah is saying all of this stuff like it's a complaint. And so Jonah does not want, in this moment, when it comes to the people of Nineveh, when it comes to the Assyrian Empire, Jonah does not want a God who is compassionate. Jonah does not want a God who is graceful and forgiving towards the people that Jonah hates. So in verse 3, it says, now, this is Jonah still praying. He says, now, Lord, take away my life, for it is better for me to die than to live, because nobody wants to be the prophet who just saved Nineveh. And so Jonah's like, I think I'd rather just not be alive anymore than have to continue living in a world where this God would save this kind of people. And so then in verse 4, it says, but the Lord replied, is it right for you to be angry? And then in verse 5, it says, Jonah had gone out and sat down at a place east of the city. Then he made himself a shelter and sat in its shade and waited to see what would happen to the city. Then the Lord God provided a leafy plant. This leafy plant gets a lot of screen time in this part of the story, by the way. Then the Lord God provided a leafy plant and made it grow up over Jonah to give shade for his head, to ease his discomfort. And Jonah was happy about the plant. This is the only time in the whole story Jonah is ever described as happy. And it's not because hundreds of thousands of people's lives have just been saved. It's because there happens to be a leafy plant that's providing a little bit of shade. And as somebody who sunburns easily, I get it. I understand. I understand the impulse to feel lots of joy about a plant that is offering me some amount of shade. So then it says, I'm sorry. Okay, so basically we're told that Jonah is very angry about the people being saved, but also he's very happy about the leafy plant. This is only time in the whole book Jonah is ever described as happy or joyful. And for the rest of the story, he's angry or he's miserable. He's, again, a very unlikable character for a Hebrew prophet in a book of Hebrew prophecy. And so, but this leafy plant turns the whole thing around. Jonah's thrilled that there's a leafy plant now. And so then in verse 7, it says, but at dawn, the next day, God provided a worm, which I love that God provides, as if this is a gift. You know what I mean? God provided a worm. It's like saying God provided a tornado. So God provided a worm which chewed the plant so that it withered. When the sun rose, God provided a scorching east wind, and the sun blazed on Jonah's head so that he grew faint. He wanted to die and said, it would be better for me to die than to live. So now that the leafy plant is gone, the whole world has completely gone down the toilet. And so he's back to miserable. And so it would be better for me to die than to live. So we're back to Jonah wishing he was dead. But this time, again, it's because the leafy plant has withered, which tragic, I know. So then in verse 9, it says, but God said to Jonah, is it right for you to be angry about the plant? Which, by the way, this is the second time that God asks Jonah the same question. Is it right for you to be angry about this? And so the first time it's about the redemption of the people of Nineveh. The second time it's about the plant. So there's a little bit of mirroring going on in the story. So God says to Jonah, is it right for you to be angry about the plant? And then Jonah's response, it is. So like not at all like introspective or asking any sort of new questions. Like, yeah, it is right for me to be angry. And I'm so angry, I wish I were dead. Naturally. So, but the Lord said, you have been concerned about this plant, though you did not tend it or make it grow. It sprang up overnight and it died overnight. And should I not have more concern for the great city of Nineveh, in which there are more than 120,000 people who cannot tell their right hand from their left, and also many animals? And by the way, if you're looking at this in a Bible, you might notice there's no more. That's the end. Like you're like, surely there's like a postscript or something like that. No, the final sentence of the entire book of Jonah it ends with, and also many animals. That's how the whole book ends. The dominant question of the whole book is, what is happening in your heart? The dominant question. So again, we tend to make it all about the fish, but the whole story moves towards this moment of Jonah like having to sort of be reckoning with, like, he's so mad about not just all these people in Nineveh, but also this leafy plant. Like this is a strange sort of way. Again, if the movie of this ended at the end of chapter 3, we would think it was great. If it ends at the end of chapter 4, you want your money back. So why does it go all the way through this whole thing about the leafy plant, and then it ends with, and also many animals? Again, the dominant question of this book has never been, why the fish? The dominant question has always been, what is happening in your heart? In what ways do we see other people that we have no natural regard or compassion for? What makes me care? I'm sorry. What makes me care about certain things and not other things? What makes me care about certain people and not other people? And it's as if God says to Jonah, your world has gotten very, very small here. And it's gotten so small, in fact, that the only thing that can make you feel any amount of joy is the presence or absence of a leafy plant. Your entire like perspective on life comes from, how healthy is this leafy plant that's giving me shade? Has nothing to do with the well-being of over 120,000 people and also some animals. The writer is pointing out how absurd it is to only care about what's happening to me or around me, or not at all be concerned about the bigger things happening in the world. The writer is pointing out, like, oh, when all I care about is my situation and the people in my like immediate orbit, and then the further away from me other people get in terms of either geography or ideology or whatever, the less interested I am in them. The writer is basically saying, like, that's about how big your world has gotten. And so Jonah's world has gotten so small that the leafy plant is really all that concerns him. Jonah looks at the lives of the people that he hates, and he wants them to suffer. And when they don't suffer, he feels angry, but he does like that leafy plant. And so God confronts him and says, what does that say about what's happening inside of you? What does that say about who you are becoming in this world? That the leafy plant gives you the ability to feel joy or sorrow, but like this, the redemption of over 120,000 people, like that doesn't move you at all. In fact, you're angry about it. The book of Jonah exists inside the book of prophets, and we talked about this last week. But the prophet in this story is the worst part of the story. The prophet is, I don't even want to say like anti-hero. The prophet is just, he basically is there for us to look at and feel like, oh, he just misses it. Like it is, and again, we can go all the way back to the beginning of the story. throughout the book, you have the Hebrew prophet getting it wrong, and you have like pagan sailors and foreign kings and like other like just random groups of people getting it right, which is a very subversive thing to do in a book of Hebrew prophecy. And so again, the book of Jonah exists inside this like collection of the prophets, but the prophet is the person we are least sympathetic with when we read the story usually. And I would argue, and I mentioned this last week, I would argue this book was never meant for the people of Nineveh. This book was never written so that the people of Nineveh would read it. The, the role of the prophet, if you kind of take a step back and look at like what is the function of a prophet in at this time and in this place, the role of the prophet most of the time was not to go to other countries and make like threats. That was not usually what prophets would do. Most of the time, a prophet's primary job was to go to leaders and religious people inside of their own communities and to say the way we as a society are interacting with the world around us, the way we see the world around us has gotten so broken and skewed that we have stopped being who we were created to be. The prophet was never meant to go other places and teach other people how to be better people. The role of the prophet was to stand inside the community and basically hold up a mirror and say, is this really who we want to be? I would argue that is what the book of Jonah is attempting to do. The book of Jonah was never meant to be read by the people of Nineveh. The book of Jonah was meant to be read by the people who saw the world like Jonah saw it. The book of Jonah was never meant to be something that the Assyrians received. The book of Jonah, the whole story, is a word of prophecy for people who are exactly like Jonah. The whole story is this confrontation towards a group of people who hate the people of Nineveh. And we talked last week, like it's not like they have no reason to feel this way. Like the people of Nineveh specifically, or more broadly, like the entire Assyrian Empire, of which Nineveh is the capital, this is a group of people who have put the people of northern Israel through a lot of pain and suffering. So their anger and their hatred is not completely unjustified. But the writer isn't interested in, is it right or is it wrong to hate some, or the writer is not interested in, like, do you have a good reason? The writer is interested in, who does this mean we are becoming? Like when we choose to hate people, even if we have a really good argument for why this group of people deserves to be hated, the writer is saying like, yeah, but do you really want to be that kind of person? Do you really want to be the kind of person who wants to see people like suffer harm, and all you really are enjoying here is this leafy plant? And so in this book, this story is basically, I would argue, the prophet and God's way of saying, do you see what we're becoming here? We only care about the leafy plant. Like, and this God is saying, I care about the 120,000 lives in the city of Nineveh, and also many animals. But your whole world is about the size of a leafy plant, and like something as small as like a hungry caterpillar can destroy your entire perspective on life. Like, how small has the world gotten for you? By the way, why doesn't it just end with the 120,000 people? Why does the writer throw in and also many animals? Is that really, like, again, from a like artistic writing perspective, like, is that really the best way to close this book? So why does it end with and also many animals? So whenever a Hebrew writer starts talking about animals or plants or anything beyond just humanity, the writer is basically saying that the story of redemption here does not simply start and stop with human beings. It extends to all of creation. There is this sense that the whole thing is being restored and redeemed and put together again. This is a God who says, you may be hyper-focused on the leafy plant, but I am looking at the whole thing, and I want to redeem all of it. And anytime my posture becomes, I want to see this group of people suffer, and all I care about is my comfort, my bubble, whatever, then my world has gotten small. And is that really who I want to be in this world? What does it look like to be the kind of person or the kind of community who cares about the things that God cares about? Take a look at Psalm 51. This Hebrew poet writes this. Create in me, in verse 10, create in me a pure heart, O God, and renew a steadfast spirit within me. Do not cast me from your presence or take your Holy Spirit from me. Restore to me the joy of your salvation and grant me a willing spirit to sustain me. So the poet here realizes there is something broken about my current perspective in the world. The prayer here, create in me a pure heart, is a way of saying, I need to learn to see the world in the same way that this God sees it. I have gotten my world has gotten smaller, my perspective has gotten damaged in some sort of way, and I need to I so deeply want to become the kind of person who is in tune with what God is doing in the world. And so this poet says, create in me a pure heart. Remind me of what it looks like to see the world as I was meant to see it, to care about the things that this God cares about. So I would argue that this is what the story of Jonah is attempting to challenge us towards, to say maybe my perspective on reality has shrunk to the size of what metaphorically might be about the size of a leafy plant. And when maybe the whole thing is a challenge to see a much larger picture. And even when it's people I do not understand and I do not necessarily always want to spend time with, that this is still somebody who has humanity beating within them. And so this story raises lots of questions about how we talk about people that we don't automatically identify with. This is a story about, what does it say inside of us? Like, what does it tell us about ourselves when someone that we don't like has something bad happen to them, and there's a part of us that feels really good about it? And again, like, I'm I'm not here like throwing stones. I'm saying, like I told you that story at the beginning, like this is a thing that I have to deal with all the time. And I assume I'm not the only one. Maybe I am, but I assume there are those of us who really, really have to dig deep to find compassion for people that we've lost sort of our connection of like their own sense of humanity or individuality. And so, but I think this raises lots of questions, particularly in the world that we live in today. Like, for example, have I ever shared something on social media that I know was mean spirited or uncaring towards someone else or a group of people, but I did it because it agreed with me? Are you with me? Like I know people who will like sit and in person will decry like, oh, we live in such a polarized time. It's just so sad. And people are so mean to each other. And then I will see them like share or post or say something that is directly contributing to the thing that they're so sad is happening. Are you with me? So like it's not just like, oh, I wish everybody else would really get on board with like how much more compassionate and kind we should be to each other, but then not necessarily participate in that themselves. You know what I mean? And so this story is basically raising questions of like, is my political ideology basically my version of a leafy plant? And is it possible that I have allowed my lens, that the lens that I have chosen to see the world through, to allow for the possibility that most people not in my direct orbit are not actually all that valuable and don't have a perspective? And so are there ways that I need to challenge my own assumptions about people that I do not know and I don't understand, but because some talking head somewhere once told me that this group of people is out to harm me or is my enemy or whatever, then I just have to take it for what it is. And so that group of people must be my enemy. I heard it on TV. You know what I mean? And so so is it possible that that has become that perspective has become my version of a leafy plant? Or have I ever seen someone fail or experience some amount of pain and internally, deep down somewhere, I thought, good, like that they needed to be taken down a peg. They needed to know that not everybody's just on board with this. And look, this is a different thing than like there are definitely times, specifically when we're dealing with people in power. And there's lots of caveats to this. But there have definitely been times when you've had somebody in power who is abusing that power and then they are removed from power. And there's a thing inside of us that's like, good, but is it good because that person now has suffered embarrassment or has lost something? Or is it good because now this person no longer has the power to continue harming people? As I would argue, one is healthy and one is not. Are you with me? There definitely have been times when I have seen people either in some sort of corporate leadership or even in ministerial leadership who lost their power. And I would argue it was good that they lost their power because they were not doing great things with that power. But at the same time, like I like to relish, like, oh, that person must really feel humiliated. Like, you know what I mean? Like, that's a whole other thing. And maybe that's worth sort of an internal kind of look inside of ourselves and ask, like, okay, which thing is it? Am I glad that a person was abusing their power and can't do that anymore? Or am I glad that they've suffered embarrassment and some sort of loss? You know what I mean? So, but again, raises the question, have I ever seen somebody fail? And my first impulse was to think, good, they deserve to fail. Or, I don't know, there's lots of scenarios, but by the end of this book, by the end of the story of Jonah, Nineveh represents all the things and all the people that we naturally tend to hate or dehumanize. And this God says, is it really right for you to want harm to be done to this group of people? And for all you really care about is whatever the leafy plant is that's giving me right now some amount of comfort or semblance of control or safety. You know what I mean? So Jonah hates the people of Nineveh, clearly. He wants to see them suffer. So, which again, if we're looking at this book in the most honest way that we can, and the way I would argue that we were intended to look at it, is there a person or is there a group of people who has stopped being human to you for whatever reason? Is there a group of people whose lives actually don't mean that much to you? And but again, by a caveat that I brought up last week, I'll bring it up again this week. This does not mean that if there's a person who's been doing harm, again, going back to the thing about a person with power, if there's a person who's been doing harm, you want to have them in a situation where they can do less harm. So that like personal boundaries, absolutely. Like you need to have some amount of like, if I just pretend like nothing here happened, they're going to have the power to do it again and again and again and again. Do not put yourself in harm's way. Don't fail to have personal boundaries, but you can have boundaries and still acknowledge that the person on the other side of those boundaries is a human being with a heart beating in their chest and blood running through their veins. You know what I mean? And so there is a fine line between setting up boundaries and choosing to dehumanize somebody. And so that's another sort of internal conversation and a journey I think probably we all have to go on at some level. And by the way, just to put it on the other side, because we're talking about it from the perspective of Jonah and the perspective of there's all these people that I hate. But by the way, if you turn it around, for some people, probably, I would imagine, maybe not for everybody, because some of you are very likable, but maybe for the rest of us who have made people upset in our past, there are possibly people in your life who wouldn't mind seeing you like fall on your face, who maybe wouldn't mind seeing something happen in your life that you did not enjoy. And thankfully, they don't get their way either. Are you with me? So there is like it's not just I feel this way towards a person and I need to sort of understand that about myself. There's also sort of the very sobering reality of like I'm pretty glad that not when I am the people of Nineveh and not Jonah, I'm pretty glad that Jonah doesn't get his way. You know what I'm saying? So may our prayer here be create in me a pure heart, create in us a pure heart. May we resist the urge to dehumanize and to minimize the humanity of other people. May we choose to never, ever let our world be so small that it revolves around what is metaphorically basically a leafy plant. May we continue to see the world in bigger and bigger ways. May you become more of who you were created to be by refusing to become the evil that you claim to hate. That is what the story of Jonah is attempting to draw us towards. The story of Jonah is this writer's attempt to say, when we choose to hate And when we choose to hope to see harm done to other people, we are becoming the evil that we claim that we hate. May we never go down that path. May we instead choose to let our world get much bigger and to find compassion in our hearts and humanity in our hearts for people who are not like us or that we don't understand, that it's so easy to write off or dehumanize. We love to talk about how sad it is that the world is polarized, but are we actually doing anything to make it less polarized?